After years of persistent lobbying, the Bryan administration recently secured a significant step forward for the territory's recovery efforts. Here's more.
President Biden has moved to subsidize our recovery with another $1.1 billion, and it may be more.
Calling it an awesome day for the Virgin Islands, Governor Albert Bryan Jr. recently announced a long-awaited increase in the federal contribution for the territory's disaster recovery projects. Bryan emphasized the years-long effort spanning 2 federal administrations to achieve this milestone.
We have been working on this for 5 years. We started with submitting a request to the FEMA director at the time to try to get it the match waived to 100%. It was denied by then FEMA director, and then we submitted it to President Trump, who denied it again. When President Biden was elected and sworn in, we submitted it to then FEMA director Deanne Criswell, where it was denied again, and then subsequently submitted it to President Biden, where it was denied again. Well, one of the things that we thought was, well, if we can't get all, why don't we try to get some?
This thinking worked. The required 10% local match was reduced to 5% for permanent work projects and just 2% for Section 428 projects. This means the federal government will now fund up to 98% of the territory's more complex projects to rebuild schools, hospitals, and other critical facilities.
If you look at that straight at 98%, we move from having to come up with 800 million to only now having to come up with 160 million. So you can see the tremendous impact in just that $8 billion in recovery alone.
Now we can identify the match so we can move forward in getting our critical schools, our hospitals, our undergrounding projects, along with our wastewater projects moving with Rebuild USVI. This is a precedent-setting opportunity that was provided to us by FEMA. This has not been done anywhere else in the history of FEMA for us to be able to get our 428 projects, which are our fixed grant projects, obligated at 98%, and also our public assistance, our 406 projects, obligated at 95%, addressing the issues for the match. We are tremendously appreciative of the partnership that has been done with FEMA here in this insular area, and all utilizing all of the benefits that are afforded to the Virgin Islands to be able to rebuild and to do so resiliently.
Joining the show from our St. Croix studio is Adrienne Williams-Octalien, Director of the Office of Disaster Recovery. It's great to have you here with us. Now, the governor used the term awesome. Joe Biden a few years ago said this was a big you-know-what deal, but let me tell you, this is cause for the territory to definitely celebrate. Big development for us. Explain, however, to our viewers that may not be familiar with this process, what this all means, what cost share is, what it is, why it's necessary, and how does it work on a basic level so they can understand.
Sure, and you know, Leslie, it is a big deal. When I first got the news, I actually danced a jig. I was so elated that all of the hard work and that it actually means for the territory. This was one of the biggest challenges that, you know, this overall rebuilding and expending what could potentially be $15 billion in federal dollars in territory is a monumental task. But basically, you know, what does that actually mean? It means that our public assistance program, which is the largest funder for the recovery dollars, has a match. It's 90% that will be obligated by the federal agency, which is FEMA, and the territory has to come up with 10% of whatever that project is. And over the course, we are looking at now where we have projects that, okay, we do have the federal funds, but we don't have the corresponding match to be able to execute the project. And in order for us to start any projects, we have to have the entire amount. So it was a significant concern. Where would the territory find? We're at potentially $15 billion in funding that pretty much is on its way based on the projects that we have, because we have over 1,500 projects in the territory. And we'll have to find a match, so $1.5 billion. And the typical way where jurisdictions will be able to provide that match is through the CDBG DR dollars that comes from HUD. We designated, no, there's $1.9 billion that was allocated for the territory from Housing and Urban Development. And we had designated up to about $500 million in funding to be able to meet the match. Well, you know what that says, Leslie? That's $500 million of funding that could have been used for housing, for infrastructure, but we would have to utilize that for the match. And as the amount of the obligations started to rise, it was clear to us that $500 million would absolutely not be enough, and we would have to be able to find those funds before we can start projects. And those are the critical projects, the larger projects. We're seeing the hospitals obligated at $1 billion. We need to find a match for that before we can actually start. So when this news came that we're now down to finding, instead of 10%, 2%, it all got now in reach. It is actually now attainable. We can move forward with getting our project started.
Well, the governor in our opening piece, discussed the rejections that we had and how long this process was. Give us a little step by step, because he is adept at coming up with local colloquialisms to discuss different things. And from Sluxin to Brata, this had sung like we had get couple bus chess, because FEMA was turning us down, and it really
Yes.
prohibited the process. So let's share with the viewers what it really took for us to get to this point.
Well, we did a lot of bawling, if you want to start the colloquialism. But we had to be persistent. It really took a full court press, if I want to use some basketball analogy, where the delegate, we spoke with everyone who would listen. The Department of Interior, we've made numerous trips to headquarters at FEMA, in DC, to all of the federal agencies, just pleading the case of the territory that here we are presented with a monumental opportunity. And we, as an insular area, the Insular Area Act allows for the waiving of the match by federal agencies. There's a lot of talk where they would tell us, well, you know what? You need to have skin in the game. I was like, well, we have skin in the game. We are committed to getting our projects done. But there was a real unwillingness to waive the match completely. So, we kept going. Our last attempt last year was to the OMB Director, Shalana Young, and pleaded the case. And we're saying, you don't have to waive the entire match. We are committed to paying our bills. We have resources that through the CDBG DR funds that we will dedicate to that point. However, it's not going to be enough. We as a territory, if you look at our infrastructure, look at the needs that we have, we cannot afford to miss out on this opportunity. And they're saying, well, there's a lot of benefit that was provided to Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. In some of those conversations, they would say, well, if we do this for the Virgin Islands, we would have to do this for Puerto Rico as well. And we kept going back and saying, no, the Virgin Islands is an insular area. The Insular Area Act provides for this. And Puerto Rico, if it's not your will, it's not precedent setting, because Puerto Rico is a commonwealth. So we've been at this. Anyone who would listen, every time I spoke, I've testified before Congress on 2 occasions, and we shared that the territory has some concern about the match. The Bipartisan Budget Act that the delegate and their colleagues worked on was monumental for the territory. But there's still an additional need for us to be able to find a match that came with the additional dollars that the BBA provided. And, our voices and our cries were heard, and we're just at a point now where we're ready to move forward.
Well, you must be reading my mind because my next question is going to be about sharing with the viewers what's the plan to meet the new match requirements? How is this exactly going to work? And what stipulations are there for the various types of funding? If you could explain that to our viewers.
Sure. So there's certain stipulations that came with the new guidance on the percentages for the match. The 428 projects, they are fixed grant projects. 428 projects mean that anything designated as a 428 project means that we as a territory not have the opportunity to go back for additional funds. It's capped. This is the amount of funding that you'll get. The only opportunities there would be for mitigation measures. But this fixed cap grant is established at the amount that was obligated. And we had to select a 428 process for the projects that would be funded by the BBA. So what we're doing now, pretty much we've had these conversations with FEMA. This funding will be obligated. In many cases, we owe some contractors money on the match. We will draw these funds down once it's obligated and be able to pay those funds out. The stipulations in the agreement is that we complete the projects now within 11 years, and if we are unable to do so, then the match will revert to 95% as opposed to 98%. But however you look at it, we will still fall in a much better position that we've been in because the match previously was 90%. So if we are unable to complete those projects within 11 years, then the match will go back to 95% as the non-428 projects or non-BBA projects. As right now, that is the baseline on the disaster. It's a 95-5 cost share on the disaster now.
Wow. Now, the governor in his State of the Territory address just last month discussed the fact that he was putting together an initiative called Rebuild VI. It's a plan to complete the remaining projects and really put a concerted effort behind rebuilding the territory post Irma and Maria. Let's talk about that plan, where it is right now, what's the timeline to roll out Rebuild USVI?
Rebuild USVI, it's definitely the strategy that we have to move the projects forward. When we looked at the experience that we've had over the last 5 years, we know that doing things differently and expecting different results is definitely the definition for insanity. And we have projects now that we're looking at the challenges that we're having with manpower, challenges that we have with our capacity to be able to manage multiple projects. The contractors that are able to get the bonding, they have many projects that they're working on right now. And we know that we had to introduce new contractors to the territory if we're going to build 5 healthcare facilities and repair 42 schools, repair or reconstruct 42 schools, looking at replacing the wastewater system and the potable water system and undergrounding projects all at the same time and still trying to keep the quality of life here in the Virgin Islands. We had to do things differently. So Rebuild USVI calls for us to issue group projects and bundles, billion-dollar bundles that would allow us to have some synergies across projects, be able to maximize on economies of scale for projects. I'll give you an example. Lay down yards, if we're doing 3 facilities in the same area, we're able to utilize the lay down areas, or materials, standardization of materials across various projects. Those are the types of things that really provided a benchmark for where we believe we are now and where we need to get to. And, when we started this off by talking to different contractors all across the United States about coming to the Virgin Islands and the opportunities that we have here and the plans that we have with Rebuild USVI. We hosted Industry Day in December. So we met with the contractors. We encouraged them to come down. And they said, well, yes, we'll come and we'll see. And we were very pleased with the outcome in December, where we were talking about to these contractors. Those are the signs contractors are signs that when you go to the United States, you see that these major construction companies that do work all over the United States will come down to the Virgin Islands. Contractors that have experience in building in difficult to construct areas where they know there's not enough manpower. They spoke about bringing concrete plants and different ways to address supply chain issues, different ways to address manpower shortages, and all the things that we know that we will be grappling here with in the Virgin Islands. So we plan to get this out and start the solicitations in March. This is the first quarter, what we committed to do in the first quarter of this year. And we are working on executing those solicitations to begin the work on these critical facilities like our hospitals, the Wang F. Louis Hospital, the Donna Christian Complex on St. Croix. Those are the types of projects that we expect to be bundling and getting them started.
You just alluded to a topic that I've heard the governor address, and that is key at the heart of our recovery, which is workforce capacity. I remember speaking to Governor Kenneth Mapp just after the storms about using back then in 2018 as the time to implement the types of training in the areas, the project management, the construction management, the heavy equipment operating that are going to be necessary to put this territory back together again. So share with our viewers what's been done and what's in the work in terms of training and upping our workforce capacity.
Well, Leslie, when the funding was originally allocated to the territory, if you will recall, HUD and some of the other federal agencies had some concerns about capacity in the territory to do this work. And since then, there was a study commissioned by FEMA, done by RAND Corporation, that really started to look at the challenges that the territory would have once the construction started and once these dollars are starting to be infused into the economy. And the capacity was stated at that time, we're looking at, they stated that if we had 5,000 workers, if every able-bodied person in the Virgin Islands was working, that means Uncle Ali, Brother John, everybody who could actually afford to be working was working, we would need 5,000 more workers. Wow. As we go further now into the disaster, it basically looking at 7,000 as the number right now. And when you look at that, our contractors that we spoke to said, we will come to the territory, but we want to maximize the workforce that's here. That was good for us. So we've started talking maybe about 3 years ago when we initially established the Office of Disaster Recovery. All of the stakeholders, the Department of Education, the University of the Virgin Islands, the UVI cell, started looking at what are the demand occupations for this disaster, where we're looking at financial analysts, construction management, the data analysis, forensic accounting. And we talked about, well, where are these needs? If we're going to be building over the next 11, 12, 13 years, that means that we need to start training our students that are in high school, being able to create offerings when at the University of the Virgin Islands and certification programs. And Dr. Hall responded, and Dr. McHale, we had a task force, and that started to offer construction management courses at the university, other courses and certificate programs. And then we also funded a program called Skills for Today with HUD dollars, where all of the NCCER courses, construction management, all of the different types of training for construction, and it was very successful. And over 800 students and participants across the territory were receiving this training so that we can be ready to address the call, knowing that there's a lot more to be done, but we want to ensure that everyone who wants to be trained and be able to tap into the resources here that exist before we have to go outside and bring folks in.
Now we are running out on time because time flies when you're having fun. But I want to address a really important topic because we hear these terms bandied about and we hear large sums of money. And the impression sometimes some people get from hearing that is that we have billions of dollars sitting in a bank account somewhere, and that's just not true. So let's talk real quickly in a minute about approximately how much has been expended in recovery dollars, the difference between expended, allocated, and obligated, the Sesame Street version, real quickly.
In a minute. Okay, so allocated is when we say that the federal government is saying, here, I have this money here set aside for you, but you can't get it until you put in an application and you tell us how you're going to spend this money. And they agree and approve the application, and that's obligated. So we have $8 billion obligated. We've created applications and they said, hey, yes, you can have this money approved for you. You do not have access to these funds until we actually do the work, and then we can draw the funds down. So you're absolutely correct, Leslie. It is not in a bank account. It is almost like a line of credit that we can draw down these funds once we have projects. So $8 billion obligated, $3 billion has been expended or spent out of that $8 billion. And we anticipate getting up to having $15 billion obligated on this disaster. I hope Cookie Monster got that.
Man, Cookie Monster and Big Bird and the count would be so proud of you. You nailed it. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. To learn more about the territory's recovery projects, visit www.usviodr.com. Be sure to tune in to Recovery in Focus, an hour-long monthly show that keeps residents updated on the progress of the territory's recovery for Hurricanes Irma and Maria. Recovery in Focus airs on the last Thursday of every month right here on WTJX Channel 12.